So these are really tough issues to wrestle with.
We need everybody to speak out, so yes.
What would we do differently?
And when we lose the environment, we lose everything.
We're missing one panelist, Naomi. She's signing books, coming in a minute, but I think we should get started because we are running late this morning. We've had some outstanding conversations. This is the roundtable, the master roundtable, and the purpose of this is to have a cross-sectoral dialogue, a conversation that brings together all the conversations over the last 3 days. So we have finance represented, we have, well, you can see who's up here. I don't need to go through, you know all these people from their presentations. And so this is going to be a culmination. The idea of these roundtables and then this final roundtable is that we're going to be putting a report together, bringing all the ideas, the potential collaborations of action that can take place, and this is going to go into a report that will be available. And it's also going to be integrated with other forums around similar issues, energy and climate change. And I think we mentioned this in the very beginning so that participants on the roundtables could be thinking along these lines throughout the conference. So I'd like to introduce David Orr, who is going to be moderating, facilitating this conversation, and he's the Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies at Oberlin College. He started a project in Oberlin with the community to develop a sustainable college town community that is fossil fuel free. And he's one of the most knowledgeable people that I've come across in all aspects of sustainability and climate change. Would you please welcome Dr. David Orr?
3.5 days, and it's come down to this. We're going to try to wrap up what has been an extraordinarily rich 3.5 day conversation. It's ranged very widely. The last panel was, I think, one of the best panels I've witnessed for a long, long time. But all the panels, there was a degree of depth and richness and practicality that was really extraordinary. So Sally and Chip and all of you that worked on this, thank you for what you've done. We're going to try to draw things together. And very, very quickly, the panelists here need no introduction, so I'll make no long introduction. Larry Schweiger, head of National Wildlife Federation to my right. Richard Cizik, the National Association of Evangelicals. Phil Radford, head of Greenpeace. Naomi Oreskes, historian at the University of San Diego, and did a wonderful presentation this morning, author of Merchants of Denial. Sylvia Earle, Dr. Sylvia Earle, Ocean Elders. Again, no introduction. Joel Surface, founder of Clean Range Ventures. Reed Detchen of the UN Foundation. Amory Lovins, co-founder of Rocky Mountain Institute. Now, we can do this in a number of ways, and I'd like to engage all of you in trying to think through what are the take-home messages from you. And I want to start with just a real brief story and raise an issue that I think has surfaced perhaps more in the last panel than any others, and it was this. I've been on a grand jury one time, and it was in a rural county in northern Arkansas, and the issue was there had been some money embezzled, a very precise amount of money embezzled from the sheriff's office that was the tax collector for the county. And on the grand jury, it became very clear as we looked at the case that the money, the embezzler, had been somebody in the sheriff's office who actually had to sign in the amount of money coming in as tax revenues and had to deduct it as it went out the door. Long story short, Thelma Louise, last name I'll leave out, Thelma Louise had been the woman who had signed in the money, and so we asked for her bank records, and it turned out she had written a check in the exact amount that had been embezzled. So it's $5,221.18 or some such. And the check had been written to the Baptist Hospital in Little Rock to pay the bill for her husband's medical care. And so we in a grand jury, and grand jury doesn't convict, it indicts, we had a clear case for indictment. as we went around, the first woman to talk, I was the third person in the grand jury to talk, and the first woman said, well, I've known Thelma Lou all my life, and I just don't think she'd do a thing like that. And the next guy said, yeah, and she didn't take a penny more than she needed. Now, the issue here is human irrationality. And we've had 3.5 days of some pretty rational discourse. We don't lack for plans. We don't lack for technology. We don't lack for leadership in some sectors. So how do we handle human irrationality? That's the first question. Anybody want to take that as a bite on? Anybody irrational enough to take on that issue? Larry, jump into that.
I'll respond, if I may. I think there's a natural tendency among us all to speak to the head. And I think we need to remember that people actually make their life choices from the heart, and particularly those that they act on. And if we want people to think about things, then let's aim at the head. But I think we're off about 12 to 18 inches, depending on the neck size. But it's really important that we really aim at the heart and come back to the heart. I try in everything I do to come back to that dimension, because I think it's where people make real decisions that stick and stay for a long time. And so I would urge particularly those of us in the sciences to remember that this is a heart thing as well as a head thing.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that and just say, I mean, this is the point I was trying to get at a little bit at the end of my comments. I actually think people, by and large, are not being irrational about climate change. I actually think that people are frightened, and they're frightened because they realize that actually this is a very serious issue which challenges the way we all live, and it challenges the prosperity that has made life in the United States and developed countries in the 20th century so incredible. I mean, in our book we talk about how the standard of living of the average American today is better than a king or queen in medieval Europe. So we have a lot to lose. Now, it doesn't mean that the way we're going about dealing with this is going to preserve and protect what we have, but I think people are afraid because I think in their hearts, in their heart of hearts and in their guts, they get it, that actually a lot is at stake. So I think people are not being irrational. People are actually being quite rational. They're afraid. They don't want to lose what they have. And they're doing what people often do when they are afraid, which is to hunker down and to go into denial mode. So I think it doesn't help to say, oh, you're being irrational. What helps is to say, yeah, you're right. This is a really, in some ways, quite frightening issue, but there is a way forward.
Well, I'll just offer this, which is, first we have to overcome kind of our built-in mental models to get to a point of rational discourse. And I look back at my family, and my family, they're up in their 70s right now. They're part of the massive industrialization, phase of our country's development. And they thought that, over the entire period of time, we're building infrastructure, we're building roads, we're building industry, we're building new products, we're building plastics. They thought that was progress. They thought we were doing good things to build our economy, to build our security, to be able to build our nation. And so they grew up with that belief system. So the hardest thing for me to have a conversation with is having the Tom Friedman conversation that they're part of the grasshopper generation. And so I have to back off that and make sure that, whether it's my parents or whoever else, you're not insulting them for their belief system or the way they came to this point, but help them find a way that to understand that we all collectively were in this and created the challenge that we're dealing with today, and we got to work ourselves out of this challenge. So how do we do that? And so from my perspective is everybody has a different set of values that appeal to them, whether it's health, whether it's environment, whether it's economics, whether it's security or whatever else. We need to have a rational argument for each one of those that's appealing to those audiences to help bring them from where they were to where we need to go, to understand that that daunting climate change issue is not something that's going to destroy us, but can help build us and help represent our values that we want to attain individually. So.
We had, of course, to face this in writing Reinventing Fire, because the point was to be persuasive, if you like, to the other side, not our own, although I don't think of it as sides. So I tried to write it in a very respectful way, acknowledging and praising the extraordinary contributions of fossil fuels to our prosperity and the good things we're able to do in the world. And at the same time, to take a bit the approach Denny McGinn did so brilliantly yesterday when he talked about the leaded paint and asbestos examples, that gradually the costs come to exceed the benefits, and new stuff comes up just as it always has that can do the job even better, and that offers indeed business opportunities for the incumbents. So they're not simply overwhelmed by the insurgents. They can actually do well in the new world with the skills and assets that they have. So we ended up with forwards to this book written by Marv Odom, who's president of Shoal Oil, and John Rowe, who is chairman and CEO of Exelon, the biggest nuclear and I think third biggest coal utility in the country. And it's being very well received initially in the business community, which is our primary audience. So I think respectful engagement and the Saul Alinsky line, talk to people where they're at, not where you're at, is the key to success.
Sylvia?
Two quick things about rationality or irrationality. First, to acknowledge that fossil fuels have really served us very well over the past century. The gifts include going to the moon. You can't do that on whale oil. Can't. Just all of the things that now are the underpinnings of our advanced society largely have their underpinnings with our use of fossil fuels, from communication, new materials, but most importantly, it's the gift now of knowing that we can't go on using fossil fuels. It's that perspective that has come directly as a consequence of burning through the assets in a very short period of time, single lifetimes, to give us the insight that is absolutely critical to where we go from here. And one of those insights, I think, that is fundamental. I mean, I'm a biologist, so I have a different take on where human beings fit in the greater scheme of things. And I'm mindful of that character who appeared in the book that I loved, not just as a kid, but still adore, called Archie and Mehitable. Archie the cockroach, Mehitable the cat. The character in question, though, is Warty Bleegans, the toad, who is an individual who thinks that the sun, the moon, the universe, the wheeling constellations really circle around Warty Bleegans. And that little toadstool was created just for his pleasure. It's, the whole point is, there we are, we Warty Bleeganses of the planet, thinking that it's all about us, that everything is anchored in the human existence, the human past, the human presence, the human future. What arrogance, in a way. It gets in the way of really understanding that we are a part of this amazing continuum that goes back, Earth alone, 4.5 billion years ago, but just to the origin of all those things that for the first time we have just a glimpse of being able to understand as no generation before. Where did we come from? Who are we? And where are we going? Let alone, how are we going to get there? So I have tremendous respect for those geniuses who figured out how to extract the fossil fuels from the earth and put it all together to give us what we now have, which is the greatest awareness, the gift of knowing. The question is, now that we know, how are we going to proceed from here?
Or as we put it in describing the new fire, we need energy to do our work without working our undoing.
The other question, I think, this question in a way is, man, how do we deal with the masses who are irrational, in a way, right? Or how do we deal with them? And it can be fairly self-defeating to blame the people or to almost use it as an excuse to say, well, it's this external thing that can get in the way of my success. And I think all the entrepreneurs here, nobody believes that, right? We're strategic, we are fighters, we like disrupting things, even Greenpeace does. And I think, so my question is, what about our irrationality? and I don't believe we'll win. Well, so I think, why are we doing the same things? I think Alex's point was really good. Why are we doing the same things that haven't worked? So why, coming as an environmental person, why are most of our resources configured in such a way that we're operating as if it's 1970, where you could walk in and write a law and it worked before we had corporate opposition, before we had all these think tanks, before we had the Koch brothers, before Olin, Scaife, the Chamber of Commerce had a 40-year plan to take over the country for the corporate right. Why do we still work that way? Why? So I think that across the board, we're still working with the old same models that aren't changing the world enough. And so to me, it seems like we need to look at our rationality. Why are we still saying climate change when the Luntz memo said that's the best way to undermine the messaging around climate change? Why aren't we looking at the great work out of Yale and all changing the way we're talking to Americans? So I think we really need to look at our irrationality. Why are we stuck on our old strategies when we haven't won yet? And I think it's really key that this group of people, of entrepreneurs, activists, strategic minds, disruptors, come together and figure out how the clean tech sector, the environmental sector, the religious communities build power. And like, we started illegally installing solar in some places to create fights. Why don't we just do that, take power from the utility? And how do we think about building power across the country, small business by small business, community by community, and not letting the Kochs, the Olins, the Scaifes, the Chambers run roughshod over our democracy? I think we have to ask ourselves about our irrationality, because no one here, when they're starting their business, blames the irrationality of the customers. We just figure out how to win. So let's do the same thing to save the planet.
I really want to... I really want to build on that, Phil. I think those were really fantastic points. And over the course of the time that I've been here this week, I've had a lot of hallway conversations with Jigger and many others, and we're trying to think, how do we actually take the irrationality and really make it a rational force for good, to empower people to be able to be the leaders themselves, to be able to go put solar on their rooftops, to be able to go do energy efficiency in their communities, to share those ideas. How do we go viral? How do we go point to point? How do we take advantage of people's inherent good, wanting to go solve problems and have a profit motive? How can we create an internet boom for clean energy and so forth? And so we started brainstorming on what are the messages that we need to take forward? How do we get people to organize? How do we get that education out in the hands of people? Because we're at a point now where solar is cost effective enough that people can put it on their own rooftops if they understand how to be able to go do that. It's obvious for most people that if you go duct your windows and look at other very simple things, you can reduce energy in your home. So how do we go uplift people and empower them? So we're talking about this notion of clean empowerment. Everybody is part of the solution. Everybody can profit from this. Everybody can make a difference and influence others by doing this. So how do we kick that off and create that spark? And how do we do that as soon as possible? Because that's going to be the most impactful thing that we can probably do right now going forward.
I think...
Reed, if you would. Excuse me, go ahead.
I think a very good way to broaden that base is to speak to people's concerns in their language. I was giving a talk at Club 20 in Grand Junction last year, not noted for sympathy on these issues. And as I was leaving, a guy came running up to me to ask a question. He said, "I'm a lifelong conservative Republican. I think climate change is a hoax. But what I think I just heard you say is we ought to do the same things anyway for national security and to make money." Did I get it? Yes, bingo. So I think a very important theme, which you touched on a minute ago, is to focus on outcomes, not motives. That is, whether you most care about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or about national security, or about public health and environmental stewardship, we ought to do the same things about energy anyway. So without arguing about why we're doing them, let's just do them together, and then the things we don't agree about become superfluous. And when I point that out, particularly to conservative audiences, it's generally the biggest applause line of my whole talk, because particularly conservatives are just as frustrated as everybody else by polarization and gridlock and stuff not working. So just letting go about the why and getting on with the what, I think, is going to be absolutely key, and I think I'm hearing that across this panel. Reed?
Reed, take. I want to get over to Reed just a sec. Reed, what does the strategy that Amory's describing and that Phil mentioned, what does that strategy look like from your perspective?
I think what we need to think about on this week is that we've heard a lot about how the other side, quote unquote, has got a unified message that they're delivering in a very effective way. There's a temptation to then say, well, that's what we ought to do. But I think we ought to look at this from the perspective of what our strengths are and say, okay, that's their ability, that's their tactic. How are we different, and how do we take advantage of that? And what we have is we have a level of creativity, we have a level of respect, we are willing to listen to our customers, and we're willing to take different approaches. So I think the message we take out of this is each in our own way. You think about what Alec Lure said yesterday to that 10-year-old nephew of Chip's about what he should do. He said, follow your passion. And I can't be Sylvia Earle, and I can't be Amory Lovins, much as I might like to be, but we can each do our own thing to our own communities in our own ways, and we can listen and we can hear, because they're not doing this out of malice. You know, there are some people out there, as Naomi has chronicled, who are doing this out of malice.
Well, even they weren't really.
But by and large, the American people want to do the right thing. They're coming at it from a different perspective. We have to hear that different perspective, and we have to understand how we can talk about what's important to us in the terms and values that they appreciate.
What does this look like in if all of you, and some of you will, talk to President Obama in a re-election campaign, or to Rick Perry or whomever, what would you tell them? What's this look like when you put it in a campaign? Or are politics simply irrelevant? Do we simply ignore Washington, D.C., and that is a strategy, and that's possible. But if it's not, and you want to engage the political arena, what would you say to an Obama for a 2012 campaign, or Rick Perry, or whoever the Republican candidate would be? Any thoughts?
Well, I would say it's a great opportunity. I think that all of our political leaders for the past 20 years have missed this, including Al Gore, maybe especially Al Gore, that if you talk about this from your heart, from your values, about how important this is for our country, for our future, for our children, I don't see how you don't fail to win.
Naomi? Yes.
So, Amory, I wanted to ask you, I'd like to ask you a question, Amory, because what you said about whether you care about climate and health, whether you want to make money, whether you care about national security, the action item is the same. I agree with that 100%. But I'm curious what you think about the fact that many people made that same argument in 1988. People made that argument during the Arab oil embargo. So I'm wondering what you think is different about this moment, that you think maybe that argument will have more traction now than it did, say, 20 years ago.
Well, we have very much more mature technical options with such a powerful business case that you don't need public policy to force people to commit unnatural acts in the marketplace. Rather, they have huge profit opportunities. There's $5 trillion on the table. And the policies you would need to enable or speed that can all be done administratively or at a state level, and no act of Congress is required. The notion that you don't actually need Congress to do anything to make this work, I think, is quite new. We got at it on the oil side in winning the oil endgame 7 years ago, but now actually the implementation has gone faster than we expected. And the same argument turns out to apply on the electricity side, where the regulatory change you need actually is at a state level anyway. It's not federal. And I think the maturity of the technical options in the market is profoundly different. I'll give you a simple example. I could assemble now, and you alluded to this, in at least 6 states, probably I'm out of date and it's more now, a virtual utility bundle of services that are all unregulated. No permission is required from anybody to go sell them. And if I sell you that bundle of services, including no money down solar on your roof and efficiency, demand response, and so on, I will deliver to you all the same service you now get from your utility at probably a lower cost, certainly a 30-year stable cost with better reliability and resilience. So you're going to pay less, it works better. What's not to like about that? Well, this kind of thing gives utility executives the heebie-jeebies. It gives venture capitalists sweet dreams. And that's the insurgents incumbents coevolution that's going on now that's very exciting. We couldn't say that 7 or 10 years ago, let alone 20.
Can I follow that with this? Joel, go ahead. You want to
Well, I mean, do we want to come back to the question of what would I say to Rick Perry right now? I mean,
goodbye.
Other than pray with me for this campaign. I've actually had some experience in this conversation, which is I did spend a period of time in Texas in trying to build a clean tech movement there. I had some fair success, even served on Rick Perry's Energy Task Force. And what I told him then is the same thing I would tell him now going forward. But to Amory's point, the market has changed. The market has matured over the period of time since I left there. But the fact remains, Rick Perry, you are the governor of the leading energy state in the nation. Over the time that you were governor, you saw Texas go from nowhere in renewable energy to being the #1 state in delivering renewable energy. You sat on a state that has undergone a deregulatory structure that's enabled a lot of retail competition for electricity, and you've been part of overseeing a grid operator that's expanded transmission capacity beyond that of any other state combined over the last over the last 10 years or the coming 5 years. So you've created the framework for the future energy grid that the rest of the nation can take advantage of. What you have not taken advantage of is creating the market for those renewables in a way that creates manufacturing jobs, service jobs, and economic leadership. And by not creating those market policies for adoption, you've ceded the leadership to other countries, and China and other countries have started manufacturing. So the question is, do you want to be ahead of the curve as the energy leading state or the energy leading nation, or do you want to be behind that curve? If you want to be ahead of that curve and you want to lead us out of this into this economic recovery, take advantage of your energy expertise and create that framework for a new market structure to allow these new technologies to come to market.
And credit where it's due, when George Bush was governor, he put in a plug-and-play rule through Pat Wood, ran the PUC of Texas, that said if you have an inverter for your solar or fuel cell or whatever that's on the approved list and it meets the National Electrical Code and UL and IEEE 1547, you can plug and play. You don't need to ask the utility. You don't even need to tell the utility. Just go for it. And that's what opened up a lot of that market.
I think with the only time I've really felt very successful at influencing President Obama was when he was planning to gut the moratorium on whaling at the IWC last year around Earth Day. And we worked with a lot of people. Sylvia, Oceana, Earth Day Network was a great ally. And so we ran ads saying Obama's planning to gut this. We had a bunch of groups came together and collected 1.2 million signatures. On Earth Day, I went to the White House, and there's a group of us there, and my allies from the solar industry went up to President Obama. There are three types of people there. There were some of the people that said, hey, President Obama, I'm that guy who, hey, remember me? I'm the person who, and he said, oh yeah, and he smiled, and everybody felt important, and hopefully he'd remember them if they did that 5 or 6 times in the future. The second group of people asked the president to put solar on the White House. And I just thought, why are we giving the guy an anecdote? Why don't we ask for transforming the market? But a bunch of people said, will you do this anecdotal thing, and would you please do it? It didn't seem like a breakthrough strategy to me. I shook his hand. I said, President Obama, Phil Radford from Greenpeace, I'm really disappointed to hear you're planning to gut the ban on commercial whaling. And he said, I know. I've seen your ads. And I said, great. So what's your plan? How are you going to turn this around? And he's charming. He smiles really big, and he says, look, I love whales. And everybody goes, kind of chuckles, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you're going to charm your way out of this. So I didn't let go of his hand, and Secret Service got a little nervous. And I said, great, so what are you doing to change your policy? And he was pretty annoyed, like, you're in my house right now, and you're holding me accountable. And he said, look, I'll do what I can. And he did. And they reversed their position at the IWC finally at the end, came out saying no weakening of the ban on commercial whaling. And that's the one time I've actually felt like I've influenced the guy. When Energy Action students came to PowerShift, the conference in Washington, D.C., my friend Trevor, who is a brilliant media person, said to him, "You have to say that the message is young people are mad at you." And so people were a little uncomfortable, but they came and the messaging was 10,000 young voters who did a ton to get you elected are mad at you. And they came and they marched, and he met with them for 2 hours, and they grilled him and they hammered him. And I think we're in this position like we were with Clinton, where everybody said, "Oh, thank God, a Democrat." You know, and then for his first major environmental act was to cause a tremendous amount of deforestation. And it took about 6 years for people like us to actually say, we've got to hammer this guy because he's taking us for granted. Next thing you know, Clinton protects 60 million acres in his 6th year in office. Huge. I think we need to go to President Obama and say, Acorn's gone, so there's half of the African Americans that were registered to vote last election cycle. You need them. White youth are registering Republican at a rate that must be alarming to you. We're going to mobilize, we're going to register people, but here's what you have to give us. And I think we have to play hardball because he's shown again and again that he's not a big champion of our cause.
I'll shift gears here a little bit. We're trying to wrap up 3.5 days of really extraordinary discourse. Can I ask each of you to say very quickly, what's the most important thing you heard from somebody else? Not something you said, but from somebody else. What's the most important thing you heard? What would you like to underscore in the transcript of this conference? Let's just go around. Sylvia, do you want to take a shot at that?
No. Not yet. I have to think about it.
All right, so we'll come back to you. Reed, you want to?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is Ted Turner saying, "I'm not giving up till I die."
That's a point. That's a good point. Phil, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I would say Ted as well. I think the one-child policy is bold. It's controversial and it's right. And I think we have to be bold, controversial, and right.
Phil and I agreed that we would, back each other on one another's thoughts, but he apparently backed out on me. So I have to agree. Ted's comments were some of the strongest and most poignant over the course of the conference, and really appreciated those. The two that I take away and try to distill away from this is we have to mobilize the masses of people to want to go take change in their own hands. Clean empowerment is the one thing that we really need to push forward out of this. Second thing, there has to be a level of engagement across old industry and existing infrastructure to bring them to the new energy infrastructure that we need to go forward to. And from my own personal perspective, that's what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis with my venture capital fund, is trying to find ways to quickly get new ideas out in the hands of traditional energy infrastructure and give them the opportunity to invest and make returns so that old traditional energy family offices, old industry can start making money in this new energy economy, so they will put more and more into it so we can make that transition faster.
Amory, what did you hear that you think is the most important?
I'm torn between Tom Steyer's political analysis and some things from the theological panel, particularly in the discussion of James Watt and Brian's remark about how we need to think and act differently when we encounter someone with that belief system.
For me, it comes from primarily from Amory, but others have said it as well, and that is that the technology is here today. It's not a matter of waiting till we get the technology to move forward. We have it, and that's very exciting, because that means, and particularly we have it at a price that's competitive with market today. And I think we ought to find ways to deploy that technology, find new pathways to get the capital. It's stunning to me that $2 trillion of private money sitting on the sidelines. People are buying gold, holding gold at $1,700 an ounce. I mean, and it makes no sense to our economy. And the last time we had fear like that, we had the Great Depression. And so I think it's a matter of rekindling this notion that we have a new pathway forward. It creates millions of jobs, and I think Amory does a very good job of describing that. So hats off to you, Amory.
Naomi?
Yeah, actually, my comment was essentially the same as Larry. I feel like I heard really remarkable stories about technological innovation and business opportunities, from algae to the reinventing fire. So I think we need to do a lot more to get that message out. I don't think most people outside of these circles realize this. And I think I'd like to hear next year a lot more about, given everything that we've heard about these amazing opportunities, you know, what is standing in the way? What is the obstacle to making this happen? And how can we remove those remaining obstacles?
I'm going to weigh in too and say that I think one of the most important things for me, Larry, you said this in describing it, we've lost the spirit of Jubilee. I thought that was profound, that 50-year give back. And the way technology comes on, it's either a techie thing or it's a gift. I think to be able to see this in this larger cultural shift framework, that for me was you and David Trickett and Richard Cizik made an extraordinarily good point. Sylvia, let's come back to you.
I've been hearing for such a long time from so many sources that, yeah, we need to get onto wind and solar, but it's going to just be a fraction of what this country and the world needs. And being here, it's been transformative. Amory, you articulated very clearly that we could do it now, that the technology exists, but it's been a thread running through the whole conference. And Ted Turner, oh my goodness, he really warmed my heart by embracing the concept. He who has invested so much in protecting the land, now embracing as well the idea that 20% of the ocean by 2020, minimum, that we have to really stretch our thinking and be able to recognize that it's the big blue engine that holds the planet steady. And if we fail to put it on the balance sheet, really nothing of anything else that we're doing matters very much.
Sylvia, thanks. We've got, we have, by my count, 20 minutes left. Is that right? Let's do this, and then let's open the floor to all of you. These are the final words we've got to say. Let's go back around to the panel. What is the most important thing you want to say to the audience, both here and it will be broadcast outside? Let's go in inverse order. Naomi, let's start with you. What's the message? It's all a surprise. But what's the most important thing you'd like to say to this audience and to the wider audience outside?
Well, I knew you were going to say that. It's not fair. I didn't have any time to think, but okay. Well, I'm a historian.
That's deliberate.
So I know. I'm a historian, so I always think about what we know from history, what we can learn from history, and how we can use that. America is a nation that has always in the past risen to challenges, provided leadership, taken advantage of opportunities, encouraged individuals and organizations and groups and institutions to go forward. I think we need to recapture that spirit. There is tremendous opportunity on the horizon to solve this problem for ourselves, for our children. And it isn't just about our children. I totally respect and love that perspective that says we have to think about future generations, but this is not about the future. This is about now. This is about things that are happening on this planet all around us. We can see them. It was the future 30 years ago. When Roger Revelle first started talking about this 50 years ago, it was the future. When Dave Keeling started measuring CO2 in 1958, it was the future. Now it is now, and now it is really the time.
Great.
I shared a slide. I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but it was my childhood mentor, whose name was Ralph Wobble, and Ralph fought on the beaches of Normandy and survived a terrible experience and came home to be my Scott leader. And he used to get me aside from time to time, and he said a couple really important things to me. One, Ralph had this tendency to be really stubborn about things, and he said to me, Larry, stubbornness is not a vice, it's a virtue. But you need to be careful what you're stubborn about, because you just might make it happen. And the final thing he said to me was, fight no little battles. I think we can be stubborn together. I think we can, and for me, that's the experience that I have here, is meeting dear friends and colleagues who are fighting this fight, recharging batteries this several days, but working together. America can be really the nation that it was set out to be, and it needs to be that. But it's all about us working together to solve these real problems for our planet, for our future, and for our current situation that we're facing in Washington and around the world today.
what we are called to do has not been done before. As the mythical judge, Lord Mildew, said, there's no precedent for anything until it is done for the first time. But we open Reinventing Fire, the book, with a quote from a Spanish poet, Machado, which translates, Walker, there is no path. The path is made by walking. And it's not always an easy journey, but I'm cheered by a remark which, according to the internet, was made by one Michael C. Muhammad. I have no idea who he is or was, but he allegedly said, let's see, what was the way it started? Everything's going to work out all right in the end. If things aren't all right now, it's not the end yet. Don't let it bother you. Just relax and keep on going.
All right, the one thing I take away from this entire event is we need to recharge our batteries. We do need to set our sights on how we're going to fundamentally solve the problems in front of us in big, hairy, audacious ways. The thing that Jigger and I reflected back on is, look, we've got to mobilize everybody to be part of the solution. We have to have a goal to be able to go do that. And so why not just go ahead and start the movement right now, today, amongst everybody here, everybody out in the internet, and everybody in our communities, to say we can have 100% of renewable electricity by 2040, and we can start doing it today, house to house, person to person, and we can appeal to whatever value structures that any individual in the United States has, whether it's security, whether it's energy independence, whether it's climate change, whether it's lowering costs of their own homes or whatever else. But find the value structures, make sure we have the messages out there, we mobilize the constituencies, and that we get the message out there and hit that big, hairy, audacious goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2040.
It's hard to follow a fellow unbelievably good-looking bald man. I mean, it's hard to say anything more. I think fight no little battles is a very profound, important thing. I think we do need to really come together to build a stronger movement of business, of people. I think we're part of a historical trend that has made addressing climate, ocean acidification, ocean protection really difficult. And the historic trend has been that our opposition has really planned for the last 40 years to take over the universities, take over the courts, so now you have unlimited cash going into elections, to take over school boards, and to basically step by step, decision-making body by decision-making body, own Congress, capture agencies, take over schools. And it's in the Pell memo, which folks know Chief Justice Pell from the Supreme Court wrote for the head of the Chamber of Commerce in 1971, a few weeks before he went to the Supreme Court. And there's been a really concerted effort by the Olins, the Scaife, the Kochs, you name it, to build this echo chamber of think tanks, to build this group called ALEC that can pass policies everywhere. They've built infrastructure. They even helped build the Tea Party. We are losing ground in this war, decision-making body by decision-making body. And if the courts are against us and Congress is against us and we're losing ground like that, we're in a lot of trouble. And so we both need our brilliant business strategies. We both need to get money off the sidelines and get new innovations in the ground. But I think we also need to really commit to take over the country and to build power and not be ashamed of building power and using it to make sure that our kids have a future that's worth living in.
I take away Brian Welch's message about talking a little bit more with joy. And I think that we have to lay out the challenge, but we also focus on the opportunity. And what we've just heard about a future, this is about a battle between the past and the future. Yes, we had benefits of the past and fossil fuels, but we don't want that to be our future. And we know that 90% of the American people agree with us that they want renewable energy. So let's focus on what that better vision of the world is going to be, where people have cheap, clean, available, affordable, reliable energy sources, not just in the United States but around the world, and how that can lead transformationally to greater social and economic equity.
Well, I confess I'm a hopeaholic. And at this conference, I've come to see plenty of reasons for hope. Technological, spiritual, intellectual, whatever. I'm mindful of Ed Wilson's comments that future generations will at least forgive us for the loss of the fabric of life that has just eroded away on our watch and those who preceded us, but it continues. And on his 80th birthday, he said, we're letting nature slip through our fingers. The real worry, and again, it's had a thread through this whole conference, that we have the power to make the world a better place. The real concern is that nature may let us slip through her fingers. Nature is indifferent to the consequences of putting excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The processes will continue relentlessly, whether it's going to affect the human future or not. It's just going to be a consequence of this is what happens when we alter the nature of nature. We don't alter the physical laws or the chemical laws or the biological laws that govern how natural systems work, but we have poked our fingers in the machinery that has caused the planet to be what it is, a place that's hospitable for the likes of us. I think the big take-home message for me is that we have the power. We now, for the first time in all of history, and maybe for the last time that gives us a chance to do something about it, we, for the first time, have the power of knowing that we've got a problem. And we have the power of knowing how to fix the problem. We have the power that comes from the distillation of being able to reach back in the past and apply it to the present and secure an enduring future for all that we care about.
Okay, thanks. You know, I think to add to extraordinary comments by an extraordinary panel, David Brower's spirit is alive and well here. David Brower was a mentor to Amory and to others of you in the room. And he used to end talks by saying something like, whatever you can do or think you can, begin it, because boldness has genius and magic and power in it. And I think that spirit is alive and well with all of you and all of you. If my clock is right, we've got about 10 minutes. Let's engage you. Questions, comments, and these are kind of wrap up. I can't see the hands very well, so down here in the front we've got two, and in the back I can't see very well. So if you'd stand up, say who you are. No speeches, just questions or real quick comments.
Roy Taylor here with Choosing Green. You've asked some takeaways. I've heard one, well, actually it was from two different sources, but it hasn't been talked about enough. Sally started us off talking about consumption. Alec brought forward change our ways. And I have not heard enough and would be interested in hearing now how we can be working toward changing our ways more than just adding renewable energy.
I'd like to speak to that because I think it's a really important question. I think there are some genuine philosophical differences among people on this issue. So I've spent a lot of time traveling the country this year and talking to a lot of people in a lot of states. And one of the things that I've taken away from those interactions is that nobody wants to be told that they're a bad person. Nobody wants to be told that they're a bad human being, that the way they live is bad, you know, that it's bad, bad, bad. But that's what a lot of people hear or think they hear from those, what was it, cow hair, environmentalists, whatever that was. So I think that there may be good reasons to change the way you live, that for many people, a change in lifestyle makes them happier, and it gets back to the joy question. If it makes you happy to live a different way, to quit your corporate job, to grow your own tomatoes, you know, whatever it is you do, food from the farmer's market tastes better. I eat at the farmer's market and only eat grass-fed beef. It makes me happy to do those things. But I don't think it's for me to tell other people to do that. I think it's for me to tell other people, we have a real problem. We have to find a way to work together to solve it. Amy has pointed out there are a lot of great opportunities. People want to make money, can make money. People want to grow tomatoes, can grow tomatoes. There are a lot of different ways to work together on this problem. So that's my view. I know it is different than a lot of my environmental friends, but I actually think it's a very important thing for us to come to grips with.
Let's go back out to the audience. Other questions or comments out here?
Hi, my name is Frankie Boyer, and I do a holistic radio show every day. And it has been a wonderful experience, my first time here at Our Day. One of the things that I know from being in the field that I'm in is communication. It is key and pivotal. Storytelling. More storytelling. It's about integration. You may not like rap music, but it's a part of our world today. You may like jazz, whatever your taste buds are, when it comes to your food. But there is a universal message here, and we have to find a way. A wise priest once said, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink, but you can make them thirsty. And I think that it is through the storytelling that each and every one of us have experienced today that will continue the message, to get it out there. It's about integration.
Frankie, thank you. Comments in the back?
I just wanted to address, we were talking about...
Tell us who you are first, please.
Chuck Carton. And the only message, I think, is that we're talking about our generation worried about now. The native tribes in the past have worried about the next 7 or 8 generations. We've got a few thousand years, 100+ generations that have got us here. Can we start planning for air for the next 100 generations? In other words, do we have to wait until we have to do air, an atmospheric improvement race, or can we start acting on it now?
Chuck, that's a great question. Others back here? I can't see in that part of the, so we got some up here.
Was that going to be, okay. Joni Clark Bruce, social architect and media producer. And I was struck by what Larry was talking in the previous panel about the biblical reference to the animals speaking out. I know Chip and Sally have deep roots, as well as myself, with the Native American communities. And normally we have Overall Looking Horse here, who has a wonderful presence in that. And I was part of a chronicling the birth of the white buffalo calf that was born in the 90s up in Wisconsin. And that was part of a prophecy about when we got so out of balance here on the earth, even the animals would begin to speak out and turn, in that case of the white buffalo calf, white. And it was the beginning of a fulfillment of the Hopi and other prophecies about listen, listen, listen. Don't lose your spirit in walking in balance on this earth. So that's part of the greater story, and I just wanted to acknowledge Larry because I had never heard sort of a biblical reference to that being the Bible addressing that issue too. So I'm hoping that we can reunite in the spirit of those things with all living things. Thank you.
Joni, thanks. Over here.
Hello, there we go. My name is Susan Bruce with Wild Wonders of Europe. And someone a couple of weeks ago mentioned a phrase to me that has really stuck with me, and that is the persistence of vision. And I would just like to thank Sally and Chip, but everyone here. We learn from each other, we inspire each other, we keep each other going. And I feel like Our Day has helped me with my persistence in vision. So I just wanted to thank everybody in this room for pulling together.
Thank you.
Paul Bassis. I have a couple of quick comments. Second one, I hope, provokes a response from the panel. The first comment is that the good news about living in a world that is unsustainable is that it's unsustainable. And so change, the necessary change is inevitable. My second comment is that I believe it's important for us to acknowledge that there has never been in the history of this nation any significant social progress without those who had the courage to conscientiously engage in acts of civil disobedience. Historically, whether we look at the civil rights movement, the free speech movement, the women's suffrage movement, the abolitionist movement, that in order for us to take terrible wrongs and make them right, we must have the courage to lay down and go beyond our comfort zone. And I would appreciate it if the panel could comment on that, because right now there are 65 people sitting in jail who are not criminals in Washington, D.C. They are heroes. Tim DeChristopher is not a criminal. Tim DeChristopher is a hero. Thank you.
Anybody, any one person want to talk? Phil, real quickly.
Couple quick things. I think to the point about stories, that's really important. What we saw in the Obama campaign is that the reason that there's such an upsurge in support was in part because of a technique, which is that all of the staff and then all the volunteers were trained in telling the story of their self, the story of us as a community, and the story of now. And there's a huge effort between a lot of different organizations to incorporate that into how we develop leaders and build a movement on climate, stopping coal, pushing for clean energy. I think on civil disobedience, I think you're right. I think it needs to be the right people doing it, and I think it needs to be done with the kind of integrity that we're seeing happening in Washington, D.C. right now. And I think until the only time that President Obama, for a while, was trying to get people to send him calcium pills in the mail just to help that spine a little bit. And I think the only way we'll get the president to stand up and actually say, okay, I won't do this pipeline and I won't take the tar sands oil, is if people really up the ante. And I think it's great, and I'd invite everyone to come.
That's great. We've got time for one more comment very quickly, and then we need to close the panel out. I believe we're out of time. Go ahead.
John Perry Barlow, LG Systems. I want to thank you all very much for the inspiration that you provided. And I just want to say, in closing for myself, I once had an old Wyoming rancher tell me that he wouldn't dislike environmentalists so much if just one of them would let him finish a goddamn sentence. And I think we're dealing a lot with style and the natural sanctimony that comes to people that are righteously indignant. But you know, you can only get people to hear what they can hear, not what you want them to. And I think all of you have reiterated that, and I hope we'll go forth and send a message that people can listen to.
John, thank you. I want to second your word of thanks to the panel here, not just for being on the panel and for the brilliance for the last 3.5 days, but for what you do and for what you stand for, what you've done so well and so courageously and so sustainably over long years. So join me, please, in thanking the panel one last time.
So these are really tough issues to wrestle with.
We need everybody to speak out, so yes.
What would we do differently?
And when we lose the environment, we lose everything.